got Jake Williams coming up next. Certainly, I think AI is a really important area. I know that Dave touched on some of the elements just that's happening in the marketplace, and I do believe this is an area that not only the internal group here at SCYTHE are looking at how we can better leverage machine learning and AI, but certainly I think the industries at a whole are looking at this. So I'm very, very interested in what Jake's going to be talking through. I know it's an area that we see both a lot of hype and hyperbole in the marketplace, where people think it's the silver bullet for everything, or it's the doom and gloom, the end of business. But ultimately, it's going to be, I think, a technology that's going to help in many, many areas. I know in our side at SCYTHE, this is an area that I'm very passionate about, and I want to be able to apply this to areas to help with some of the mundane, tedious activities that people are doing, or simply when you don't have enough people to get through these things. I mean, what are your thoughts here, Trey? I know that you speak with a lot of people across the industries, but what are your thoughts?
I think there's been a lot of good conversation going on in here, and when it comes to a lot of what we've talked about so far this morning, the people are really the foundational piece of it. And if you have a lack of ability, say whether that's funding, finding qualified candidates in your area, whatever the problem happens to be, it's not the end of the world as long as you can get buy-in from the organization and everyone can be together. A lot of the stuff that's low-hanging fruit, say like the telemetry piece, getting things like that implemented in your environments, are relatively harmless from an impact perspective. It's not directly impacting your users, and it's the things that we could implement, have minimal impact, but have the biggest impact from a security perspective, because now you have that visibility, gaining that information of what assets you have, all of that. It's the simple things that aren't directly impacting your users that are going to have the best effect for you, I would say.
Yeah, so I mean, with that, I know Jake Williams is ready to roll, and why don't we get him queued up and get into his talk on security and AI? Hey, Jake.
How goes it, good sir?
Hey, how are you?
Hey. Very good.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see if I can share my screen here. Oh my gosh, it says sharing is easiest with two monitors, and I just put the other monitor away. Give me 1 second, and I will grab the other monitor, because of course I'm out on the road doing security, as it turns out.
Yeah, no problem.
That's what the extra monitor is for, and you can see, of course, I prepared with StreamYard here, and definitely did a rehearsal with StreamYard. No, did not. Let's see. But that's okay. It's okay. So,
well, thank you for joining a few minutes early too. I know that with virtual events, with people's travel and weather, we can always run into things, but definitely appreciate your agility.
Oh my gosh, definitely. And in fact, I kid you not, I'm joining from a client's conference room that they were nice enough to provide me. They're like, "Hey, we definitely need you on site for today." And I said, I already committed to do this keynote. And they're like, "Well, it's okay. Then you can just do it from a conference room." And I was like, "Game on, right? I'm here." So, let's see. Monitor second to power up.
All right.
By the way, if you do work on the road, folks, I cannot recommend highly enough to get a little travel USB monitor, because it's game changer.
It is with a laptop. I do the same thing, Jake. It's amazing. They're tiny. They're so thin. You pack them into your carry-on. It's like it's not even there. So
yep.
Really.
And people come to me and they're like, "Oh, I'm so worried it'll break." And it's like, man, these things are so cheap now. Who even cares, right? If it does break, then worst case, it's okay.
They've come a long way too. Like, especially now you can power them over USB-C. You don't have to have an extra dongle or anything crazy with you.
Right. Yeah, I used to, when I bought my first one a couple of years ago, there were a couple $100 and you had to have a separate power brick with you and a whole, I think this one was, the last one I bought was like $99, and a USB-C connection and done, right? So, okay, let me reset the slides and I think we should be ready to go. Play from current slide. Let's see, and then if I can present by sharing a screen. There we go.
Amazing.
It's
All
there.
right.
Okay. Hey, rock on. Okay. Well, hey, let's do this, right? So, hey, by the way, thanks. I want to thank Scythe for having me. I do want to make a couple of call outs here before I start this, right? So Mark was kind enough to ask me to do this a couple of months ago, and I, certainly jump at the opportunity to help with Scythe. As folks I think here probably know, or some folks may or may not know, I don't know. I actually worked with Scythe, a couple of years ago, and it was absolutely great. Had a great time. Had some other opportunity to jump over to, but I still love working with Scythe. I get a chance to work with Trey on a monthly basis. Trey, I'm okay to talk about this, right?
Yeah, it doesn't hurt me as slightest.
Okay, so man, I work with Trey
Yeah.
on a monthly basis, and this guy absolutely rocks. I helped put together some of their emulation plans, but Trey is the brains behind the whole thing. Trey decides what's going out every month, how we're putting stuff together, and man, he is an absolute rock star. Scythe is lucky to have him. Anywho, with all that said, man, if you have not been living under a rock over the last, 18 months, AI is a constant, just a constant buzzword, and something that undoubtedly you're going to hear a lot more about. And I'm going to take a little bit different, I suspect, a little bit different tact on this, or a little bit different approach on this than what you might have heard before. I promise I'm not going to dive into, oh my gosh, scary AI or whatever is Terminator coming. I want to talk about how you as a security professional can use this. And then I also want to give some examples of places where maybe people shouldn't be using AI. And I'll round that out talking about how AI may impact your security career, right? And so hopefully this is a little bit different tack than what I'm hearing. Certainly is different than what I'm hearing generally. But look, a little bit of background about me. I'm a security researcher, risk management consultant. On IANS faculty, I was a former SANS instructor. If you don't know the whole shadow brokers thing, by all means, go look that up. But good old Russian intelligence endorsed me as one of their favorites. But the things I very much dislike, right? People needlessly adding blockchain to a software solution, and I'm starting to get there with AI, right? Now, I'm going to separate AI and blockchain a little bit because AI actually has a lot of commercial successes, right? So, but alas, we're getting there. So let's talk about the fact that this is not new, right? So my first experience with artificial intelligence, with in the intersection of artificial intelligence here, my first experience with artificial intelligence was obviously in college, but actually using it, right? It was 2008. I was working with the Institute for Defense Analysis. I got detailed over there, and we were, working on some machine learning, AI actually, but some machine learning as well, with, solve some interesting classified security problems. And I guess that's as far as I can really go there. But folks are jumping up and down. They're like, "Oh my gosh, what if systems can autonomously hack each other?" I'm like, "Brother, we did that. It was 8 years ago." Now, I looked for my pictures of this event because I was there, right? This is, I'm a regular DEF CON attendee, and I looked for my pictures here. Sadly, the only photos I have of this of my own are us raving there, in the middle of the night with the glow sticks kind of going around. I'm probably too old to be doing that now anyway, but 8 years ago it felt okay. And so, but alas, this is again not new. 2016. Right, DEF CON hosted the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge. The whole idea of the challenge was that basically teams were going to create autonomous systems that were going to be handed a piece of software, and ultimately then, or a set of software, servers, and ultimately both defend their systems and attack other people's systems, right? So attack the other contestant systems. Now, if you're familiar with the DEF CON CTF, and basically this mirrored the DEF CON CTF, the way that this works, it's a very unique capture the flag because it focuses, again, on both attack and defense. Rarely do we do that. And so the way that this typically works is that you have to go and reverse engineer the software to go find the vulnerability. You then go and attack, and you get points for attacking, but there's a multiplier there. And that multiplier is based on how, for any given vulnerability, how available is your service, right? So there's a scoring bot that's cutting around, right, trying to find out, right, is your service still available? So when you patch your service, right, because you found the vulnerability, now you need to create a binary patch. So basically in binary opcodes, or write the assembly and assemble it, and all these computers were doing that. Right? That's what they did, right? So they played the CTF while the humans played the CTF. Some of these did fantastically, others flopped almost immediately. But my point here is, again, autonomous attack and defense is not new, right? And again, it was on the grand stage, right, at DEF CON in 2016, right? So let somebody come in and tell you that the sky is falling, Terminator's here, my friends, it is not. Skynet, this is not, right? I want to highlight here that today's generative AI is a regurgitation tool. Now, this is really good news for you if you're a defender, because threat actors can't use generative AI to invent new attack techniques. Right? They can use existing attack techniques and scale those, right? But they can't. But they ultimately can't invent new attacks. Purely using generative AI. Now, the really bad news is, we haven't been great at stopping their regular attacks up to this point, right? So where I tell folks to focus on, like, we're already seeing lots of AI-generated phishing emails, right? Clearly AI-generated, that really works in a couple of ways, because it stops the old trope that we had about, hey, look for the bad grammar. No, right? I mean, even if English isn't my first language, great. By the way, ChatGPT will absolutely write phishing emails for you. You don't have to worry about some kind of underground cybercrime, whatever. If you ask ChatGPT to write a phishing email for you, it'll tell you no, it can't do that. Even if you tell it's for educational purposes, that used to work. You know how you get ChatGPT to write a phishing email? You tell it that you want a marketing email, and you want the marketing email to have a call to action, right? You tell it the pretext, and you say, I need you to have a call to action where you click this link and log into your account to access the marketing slick. Right? It'll write it for you 100%, because it's a helpful AI assistant. Now, a marketing email where you click the link and log in to access the marketing slick sounds a lot like a phishing email to me. In fact, it's indistinguishable other than the intent, right? But it'll generate it for you all day, every day. And if you've ever used ChatGPT or Gemini or any of the publicly available large language models, you've probably seen the regenerate response button at the bottom. And what that does is ultimately it says, hey, let's go roll the dice again, right, with our probabilistic model, and generate similar but not identical output. And so once they're able to generate that similar but not identical output, that's bypassing a lot of secure email gateways, right? And so a lot of secure email gateways rely on the fact that that they're seeing lots of similar messages, identical messages, except for basically the recipient. Again, with generative AI, that's breaking our secure email gateways. Now, if you're thinking, well, I could use another large language model to summarize those emails and find similar, you could, but that's super, super expensive, and it's asymmetrical, right? Meaning the threat actor spends a lot less, right? Basically advancing their capabilities than you do. You spend multiples what a threat actor is, right, trying to defend against this, and they're big multiples, like in the hundreds, right? So big problem here. But it's a regurgitation tool. It's not going to generate new ODAs, right? Now, a question that I get all the time, including, I kid you not, I get in the lift this morning, right, and coming over to my client site, and the driver. I guess I'm okay to say I'm up in Boston. The driver, he's a first-year comp sci student, I think at what did he say? It was one of the big universities up here. But I think it may have been MIT. I can't remember for sure now. But regardless, he's like, what do you do? Right. And I said, oh, I'm a computer security guy. He's like, oh, really? He's like, hey, man, level with me. Is AI going to take my job? He's like, I'm first year. I want to know now, should I be moving into nursing or something else? I'm like, brother, you're set. AI is not taking your job, at least not for the foreseeable future. Right. There's obviously, and I told him too, one of the great things about the AI space right now is, well, I'll come back to that anyway, right? We'll come back to that at the end here. So look, AI is probably not going to take your cybersecurity job. Microsoft Security Copilot just went GA, general availability, the 1st of April. And I got to tell you, I wish this was an April Fool's joke, right? Because if you come in and tell me as a CISO or a CEO, particularly a regulated firm or firm processing regulated data, and you're like, hey, your SOC analyst may just start making up information, right? And it may claim to have quoted made up information, even making up dates. I'd be like, absolutely not. You'd fire any employee that did this, by the way, right? But yet this is the splash screen that you're getting with Security Copilot, right? So fantastic, right? Okay, cool. So AI is not going to take your job immediately. Now, this gentleman, Ru Campbell, though, posted some fantastic, Security Copilot tests publicly, and I'm going to call this not great, right? Because it turns out here that despite you paying for this by what they call the SCU, or Security Compute Unit, and by the way, I should mention here before we go any further, I am not saying that AI does not have a place in security right now. I'm not saying that Microsoft Copilot is bad. I'm saying obviously evaluate some of this, but people are super worried about what can threat actors do, and then how will Copilot or some other tool take away security jobs. And I want to highlight here that I feel like that's unlikely to happen in the immediate future, right? At least for the foreseeable future, because as it turns out, here this is a pretty straightforward question. In Entra ID, how many users have added FIDO2 security keys as an authentication mechanism? Well, he has several in his tenant, all right? And he makes that very clear. He's got several in his tenant. Copilot comes back, despite having charged you for the request, right? Says, hey, I'm unable to determine, right, how many users have added that. Maybe you provided. It's on you, right? It's gaslighting me. Maybe you provided bad input. That must be the problem, right? Okay, well, that's, not great, but maybe not horrible, right? Well, let's take a look at this, because this, my friends, this is an audit nightmare, right? So here, he says, hey, can you let me know all the devices that are used by his identity, right? In Intune or Defender, and any vulnerabilities those devices have based on Defender vulnerability management data. Wow, that's a pretty straightforward request, pretty easy. I want you to note here that it immediately identifies 6 devices, but only reports on 4, and only partially, right? Now, again, I'm not saying that Security Copilot can't help. Please don't let that be the takeaway here, right? It absolutely can, and generative AI can absolutely help you. But I also want to note that the road, although not yet littered with bodies, certainly will be, right, of people blindly trusting this, right? I worked with a client last year who had used ChatGPT to help them write a PowerShell script to help them retrieve accounts, ultimately, that match some criteria for auditing. And the PowerShell commandlet that they used only retrieved 50 accounts. Right? So the script worked exactly the way they expected. It returned 50 results. As I was looking at some data from that audit, listen, folks, I don't like round numbers. If it's a power of 2 or a divisible of a power of 2, right? So think about your, negative 128 to positive 127, right? Those kind of things, right? Like, that makes me squeamish, right? Numbers at boundaries, and 50 is one of those nice, clean, we only return you 50 rows unless you know to ask for more. Yeah, so it turns out there were really 311 accounts that they needed to pass to their auditor, but the script didn't know that. The script worked kind of. It plausibly worked. And this is part of the problem with AI. Again, if you're not following along carefully here, and I'm going to back up, right? Back up here to Ru's earlier response. If you don't know that you have FIDO keys, right? Or if this response is not being read directly by a human, but is being integrated into another tool, right? And the error is interpreted. I've already seen this happen, by the way. The error, not in security specifically, another generative AI application, the error is interpreted as must not have been any results, right? That can be problematic, significantly problematic. Okay, so again, at least this is an obvious failure. It comes first and says you have 6 devices, and then only prints 4 devices and not the relevant data for those 4, right? What about chasing ghosts? This is fantastic, because he follows up and he says, hey, now there's some other missing stuff here. I'm not showing some intermediate steps. But he follows up, saying that because one of the top threats that was identified was malvertising. And he's like, I don't think that's right. I've got uBlock Origin on all my devices. And so he's like, hey, why'd you say that? And it reports vulnerabilities to him in software he does not have installed on any of the devices. So it grabbed vulnerabilities that are real, but not actually really installed on, he's not really vulnerable to them, right? So interesting there as well. Imagine the amount of work that you would spend chasing, these kinds of ghosts. This is why I'm kind of coming, around to say, like, there's a lot of generative AI that is just not ready for prime time, right? And this is my favorite one of all of these by far, right? And this is that your SOC is, your SOC is too tired to respond. What this really means is you ran out of security computing units, and so you're going to have to, you're going to have to wait. But again, it doesn't tell them that, right? And so meanwhile, the SOC analyst who has come to rely on this tool, right, however ill-advised, right, who's relying on the tool, now is not getting a response. Now, again, if an analyst is looking at this, at least they know they're not getting a response. If this times out, right, and the logic in a back-end application waiting for the response treats that as a null response, I can only imagine the logic errors. Well, again, I've already seen one, play out from this in generative AI. Lots of interesting new security problems. I'll come back to that as well, right? Here's a security tool creating security problems, right? Okay, so we talked about some not uses for generative AI. Let's talk about a couple of uses for generative AI. How can I use this to my advantage? Well, first off, folks, one of the first things that I see people in security analysis, right, running into, a lot of us have a lot of varied skills. I almost feel like Liam Neeson in Taken, right? He's like, I built a very specific set of skills, right? Okay, cool. But then I also find that a lot of people don't know where to apply those skills. Like if you go and you hand them a packet capture and say, go analyze this, they're like, okay, I can do that. You hand them an event log and say, go find me the blah, they can do that. But then you say, I've got an alarm, go. And they're like, whoa, okay, I'm gonna need some guidance there. Like individually, they know how to do the actions. They don't know which actions to do, right? So it's gluing those together. And it turns out large language models are fantastic at this because, as it turns out, they're regurgitation engines. And lots of security folks have written a lot about how you should respond to an incident and particular types of incidents, even nuance in those incidents. And so, by the way, too, this is a fantastic use case, even for consumer grade chat GPT, because there's no data privacy issue here. There's no data protection issue. If I say, for instance, right, that my company is using Defender vulnerability management and, CrowdStrike EDR, CrowdStrike Falcon EDR, and we have a Sentinel SIEM and a Microsoft 365 10, all of that is in your job postings, by the way, right? I mean, that's how you're hiring people, right? And, ultimately interviewing and whatnot. And so you're set. Don't worry about that, right? Okay. Okay, right? So here's an example here. Again, none of this, I'm going to note here, none of this is immediately sensitive, right? People get, hit with, HTML smuggling all the time, right? And so, by the way, there are SCYTHE threats built around HTML smuggling. And so, here, say, be verbose and enumerating steps. And it does. It's pretty good here, right? And if you want any more detail on any one of these steps, you just tell it, right? And say, hey, walk me through how would I check the email, right? And it'll give you PowerShell commandlets. Now, again, do a little bit of review here, right? But it'll give you some ideas of how to go do this stuff, right? Again, this is a fantastic use case for generative AI and can help particularly junior security analysts or even mid-grade security analysts, level up, right? Okay. So what about writing reports? This is another fantastic use case. Now, look, folks, I actually have written a training course on, writing security reports, delivered it to a couple of private clients as well. And it's fantastic. Well, I say it's fantastic. I'm biased, obviously, but look, I'm going to tell you that generally folks suck in security at writing reports. I don't know what it is. We do great tech work, right? But then we need that translation layer to write that report and communicate that to our stakeholders, often in non-technical terms, right? Now, unfortunately, this is not something that I can use a consumer-grade large language model for safely because there's really a lot of proprietary data in those reports, right? Typically, and that's where the sensitivity comes in. So I probably would need to use something that's going to be more private, like an Azure OpenAI connector or something like that, right? But if you give, as it turns out, your large language model basically a sample report, basically a template, if you will, it'll go write a report for you. It does a good job. Let's take a look, an example of that. Don't take my word for it, right? So this comes out of a tabletop exercise that I ran last year. I should mention, by the way, Please do not go and go to a C2 domain or something you see in here, because they are malicious. All of my tabletops are ripped from the headlines kind of thing, right? And so please don't I don't want you to get infected or something. So I mean, again, it writes a pretty decent report from some pretty just raw notes. Now, one of the things that I do want to call out here is that this particular tabletop exercise involved two different companies. I never use the word, supply chain or anything in the raw notes. I just talk about, there's an organization, there's another organization, but we never, there's never a connection made that one organization, indeed affected the other. It turns out that is exactly what the scenario is, right? It's a vendor email, well, at least the pivot is a vendor email compromise. That's never discussed in the notes. It's just a bunch of raw notes. ChatGPT puts it together, right? ChatGPT, in fact, puts it together when several of the security analysts that I've run the tabletop with did not, right? And so now, want to be super clear here, it gets a lot of stuff wrong sometimes too, right? But again, good report verbiage, right? And even calls out, now granted, I highlighted this, but it does call out, it's notably, excellent, love that, right? Okay, so look, I've shown you some good, I've shown you some bad and ugly, downright ugly, right? On generative AI. Let's pivot over here into, is AI going to take my cybersecurity job? Listen, folks, there are tasks that can be partially or fully automated with generative AI, and it's going to impact security jobs, no question, right? But the really, really good news, and what I told this college student this morning, was that cybersecurity is one of the few fields where those that are displaced by AI are well suited to take the new jobs created by AI, right? We hear this a lot, right? Where, as they talk, Klarna, I think it was, recently replaced 700 customer service agents, with generative AI, and they're having, at least, to what they've spouted out publicly, they think fantastic results with this, right? And so, now they may not replace any more necessarily, they've kind of hit that critical mass of where that makes sense. But they ultimately, they're getting, good results with this. And part of the reasons that they published, at least their stated reasons for publishing, in such detail about their program, is they said they want other people to be able to, start looking at what impact is this going to have on society. And look, rock on. Let's do real talk for a second, right? A customer service rep in a call center whose job is displaced by AI, by a generative AI bot, is probably not going to take advantage of one of the new jobs created by AI. Right? That's just real talk. But you, on the other hand, are already working in security, right? And you get displaced by some some better analyst. And by the way, I don't think the displacement is such a real thing here, so much as because I talk to people and nobody's doing all the security they want to, right? I think what this is going to do is free you up to do other things in security, right? And so that's the really, really good news, right? So AI is not taking your job. It's not coming for your job in any meaningful way. Now there are a few of you, right, who maybe it is, right? So I know some folks, and forgive me here, if your entire value proposition to an organization is, I'm human Google for, NIST 800-53, then yeah, your job is at risk with generative AI, right? And semantic search and natural language processing. But again, that's an easily automatable function, right? Your value is being able to synthesize that information, retrieve and synthesize that information. It turns out that's something that generative AI does, static information like 800-53 does very, very well. And so, I'll also mention here too, that if you're really worried about this, move into a risk-averse vertical, healthcare, legal, pharmaceuticals, right? They are very risk-averse for automating security tasks, utilities, right? Those are safer places to be, right? Because, whereas executives in other fields may weigh differently the risks of cost cutting, yours will not be jumping on AI assistance anytime soon, at least not for critical security functions, right? But let's pivot over here, right? Do best practices really still apply to AI, right? I like to tell folks that no matter what, best practices are situational, right? Always have been, always will be. Just like this sign over here, which, by the way, I know this was photoshopped, right? But I don't even care. I love the sign so much, right? Because it probably is a best practice if there aren't a bunch of alligators on the road there, on the side of the road, to move to the side of the road, right? But again, we have to evaluate our particular situations and say, you know, are our best practices still apply? Do they still apply here? Do existing best practices still apply to AI? And are existing best practices enough for AI? Right. So two separate but related questions, right? Let's talk a bit about those. And look, for folks that have followed me for years, you know that I like to kind of walk through analogies. I have a kind of an old trope that everything old is new again, because I've seen it so many times in computing, right? And I'm not trying to date Mark here, but Mark's been around the block a couple of times too. I know he's seen kind of this flywheel, right? This resurgence, and it's like, okay, like I've been down this road before, man. We've seen this play out, right? So let me give you a little perspective here, right? So, oh, where'd I go? There we go. So a little perspective, and I want to drop back to Web 2.0. All right, so let's call it the mid 90s, right? So Web 2.0, we saw entirely new categories of vulnerabilities emerge. In fact, I remember prior to working with SANS, right? I mean, I remember seeing this this presentation, and it was mind blowing, right? It was from Ed Scotus, and Ed Scotus, talked about network penetration testing, right? That's kind of his claim to fame. And he talks about network penetration testing. And I want to say this is maybe 2005 or 6, somewhere in there, right? So Web 2.0 is a thing. It's been a thing for a couple of years, but it's still feeling pretty newish, right? And Wi-Fi, right, is now a big thing too, and getting pretty ubiquitous, right? Because we suddenly have laptops, that aren't like 100 pounds, right? And so he comes in and he talks about like the trifecta of awesome, right? Where he brings in Josh Wright, who's a Wi-Fi expert, and he brings in Kevin Johnson, right, who's a web app expert, and he made the point and he drove it home there, right? That specialization will always rule the day. He's like, I'm going to be a network pen tester. I'm going to go look for open services, and I'm going to, right, and so he's like, and I know how to use those services, and now look, he's like, but it turns out, right, there's only one port. It's 80, right? I can only go, now not 443. This is the old days. I remember 2006-ish, 5, 6-ish, right? Now, look, some web servers really sucked and go buffer overflow, right? I'm going to take those out of the equation for a second. It doesn't work for my analogy, and only for that reason. So, look, what do SQL injection and buffer overflows have in common, right? Both are just different forms of failed input validation. Right? Now, obviously, they require different skills and tools to discover and exploit. But most attacks on web apps, they have prior analogs, right? And so, folks, this is actually true for every new technology that I've looked at. Most of the attacks, and folks are like, oh my gosh, brand new technology. I just start with security first principles, right? Confidentiality, integrity, availability. Start thinking input sanitization. Start thinking about threat modeling. Where does something cross a trust boundary, right? And so, see, everything old is new again. Now, I don't mean to imply for a second, right, that you can somehow be awesome, right, and not have any brand new, some brand new technology, and somehow not have any other skill sets, right? No, that's not going to work, right? So certainly we needed new skill sets. Ed Scotus recognized that, right? He said, hey, that's why I hired this guy, who's this awesome, wireless ninja, Josh Wright. And that's why I have this guy over here, this awesome, web app ninja, Kevin Johnson, right? And he's like, those guys specialize in this stuff, but it's the whole, it takes a village kind of thing. Now, some of us can't afford a village, right? Rock on. You can still be, right? You can still be successful, right? Maybe not maximally successful, but definitely, successful nonetheless. And so I want to make a bold prediction here, right? Just like today, there are, and for a decade plus now, granted, again, I'm rolling back here, 2 decades, right? To kind of highlight that again, this is a cycle that we see happen again and again and again. And so I think you're going to see AI-specific security testing and certifications, offered by major vendors in the next 3 years. I think it's probably less than that, honestly. I'll be surprised if Microsoft doesn't have a security cert for their generative AI in the next 18 months, right? But that was a little more aggressive, so I'll just say within the next 3 years to make my bet a little safer. Now, do you need it? That's a whole other separate question, right? But the point here is that we're going to see additional specialization into that AI security testing. And just like you may or may not be a web app testing expert, right, or a web app security on the defense side expert, right? Again, you may or may not include AI as one of, in generative AI, as one of your core specializations, right? So what can we do about the security of this stuff, though? Because, wow, right? Look, you're going to have to threat model your AI-enabled applications, period. I want to note here, and I don't speak in absolutes a lot, but every single vulnerability that I've seen in a production AI-enabled application would have been discovered with a formal threat modeling exercise. I'm not against Agile. I want to be super clear about this. I'm not against Agile. But unlike most people who practice Agile, poorly, by the way, I've actually read the Agile Manifesto. I challenge people on this regularly to show me where it says, by the way, don't do threat modeling. It doesn't say it. It's nowhere in the Agile Manifesto, right? You can't find it, right? And so it's implied. Now, granted, it doesn't say, by the way, do it, but it's implied, right, that you are going to take security into consideration as you're building your story points, as you're building your sprints, and ultimately, I hate to say it, right, that ultimately in Agile is very often how we're building our architecture. And so, or developing our architecture, I guess maybe is a better way to say it there, right? And so, again, at this point, when we really step back and look at where our trust boundaries are at, we can implement guardrails. Large language models, look, folks, prompt injection, right? It's a feature, not a bug. It's going to keep happening and happening and happening. How do I know? Because cross-site scripting in the year 2024 is still a thing, right? What do cross-site scripting and prompt injection have in common, right? It's confusing data for code. And when you think about a prompt really is nothing but data and code, right? In a prompt, you're giving a direction, that's code. You're saying, act on this data, do something, transform this data, do something with this data. In cross-site scripting, I have that nice script tag, right, that encloses the code, right? It's very structured, right, and encloses the code. But there's nothing like that in prompt injection. This will always be a problem. The best defense that I've seen right now against prompt injection, ironically, is to feed the entire prompt to another large language model, right, and say, instead of saying interpret this, you're saying classify this, right? So basically doing zero-shot classification and saying, does this look like prompt injection? That's the best defense that I've seen against it thus far. And even that's been attacked, right, by, I guess you call it second-order prompt injection, right? So anyway, the long and the short of it here is, though, threat model. We're back to, again, security first principles. Treat any data coming from the AI as untrusted input to the rest of the application. Worked an incident last year, right, where I got a chance to see firsthand where the impacts of trusting the output of the large language model data when a threat actor was able to get it to emit cross-site scripting payloads that ended up in log files that stole cookies from customer service managers on the back end, right? And so, of course, then let them access the system and their CRM system, and that's a bad day for any company, right? Source of the vulnerability, not sanitizing input. They sanitized all the input the user sent, no problem. The user could never have submitted that cross-site scripting payload, but they did trick the LLM into doing it. Nobody sanitized that, right? This is just basic. This is threat modeling 101, across the trust boundary, but has nothing to do with AI, by the way. I want to be super clear. That vuln has nothing to do with AI, right? Okay. So I'm going to wrap up here with a couple of closing notes here, right? So why might you want to learn AI? Listen, if you want to be an expert level tester of web applications, you must understand the nuances of HTTP and SQL, period. You could never discover an HTTP smuggling attack without this understanding. Just never, right? You might fuzz around and get a cross-site scripting like a trivial XSS bug, right? But you're not going to get HTTP smuggling bugs. Just never going to happen, right? But I do want to note here, right? By the way, if you're sitting back and thinking like, I don't know what that HTTP smuggling is, right? Well, okay, gotcha, right? But it's critical here. You can still provide a ton of value in testing web applications without this understanding, right? And so that's really the key. You still can provide a lot of value, and the same is going to be true for AI. Don't let anybody out there tell you, by the way, if they argue with you and they're like unless you unless you have a doctorate in computer science, or you are a data scientist, you can't help test AI applications. Send them my way and I'll hit them with a stick, right? Because that's just ridiculous, right? They're gatekeeping. They probably don't understand it themselves, right? And so I'm enough said about that, right? How do you up your game though today, right? This book, go buy this book, right? So this book's called The Alignment Problem. If you don't have people on your staff with formal education, machine learning, this is it, right? Evaluate these use cases, understand how we got to where we are. Remember that everything old is new again? Hey, guess what that applies to too? How we've screwed up with AI, right? And this book is a fantastic history of, and not history for history's sake, the lessons that we've learned very painfully and often repeatedly, right, along the way, and then again had to learn them repeatedly and again, right, along the way, right? So there are a lot of folks that are going to be saying, how could I ever have seen this coming when I'm playing the expert witness role? And I'm going to say, my friend, The Alignment Problem, it's how you could have seen it coming, right? Please go read this book. This, no joke, is accessible to anyone. There's no mathematics in it. There's no mathematics in this book. It's fully accessible even to non-technical folks. Okay, so now you're like, cool, but I need to go deeper. And if you need to go deeper into the matrix, this is the book for you, right? Start with the alignment problem first, because it is far more valuable for you to understand, right? But then once you really want to understand how deduction and induction and abduction, right, work at a theoretical level, right? And that's before you get into the matrix multiplication and, cosine similarities and whatever. They don't get into that. Don't worry about the deep math stuff there. But the next step up before you get into the mathy, get this book, right? Now, this is not appropriate for this. This will put you to sleep unless you're ready, right? Just know that up front. I think it's a fantastic book personally, but I'm a little weird, I guess. All that said, hopefully these are two resources that, well, not hopefully, if you get these resources, right, they will absolutely help you up your game. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here and just note that, look, AI does present a whole new set of challenges as well as opportunities for security teams. The risks in AI solutions are generally manageable, though, with well-established solutions. Threat model, understand your trust boundaries. Most attacks, real attacks, not academic stuff, real attacks that we're seeing are basically violations of security first principles. Now, listen, there's a lot of risk out here, and unknown is scary. And our job in security, by the way, is to help the organization contextualize risk. But your job is not to say no. It's not to say no because there are unknowns. It's to get to yes within the organization's stated risk tolerance. Your job is to enable the business. Go forth, my friends, and enable the business. With that, really, really appreciate everybody's time today. Mark, thanks so much for asking me to come do this. I love talking about this stuff, and I hope this is valuable for the SCYTHE audience.
Yeah, thank you for joining. It's definitely a key area that I know a lot of us have a lot of passion about where AI and the technology itself is going to go. I mean, it has such great applicability across all the industries, but cybersecurity is one of these big areas. We did have some really good questions, Jake. I'll pose one that came in from Don, who asked if he said, will you be discussing threats to a higher level exploitation of AI, poisoning learning models and data sets, availability, target and backdoor poisoning? What are your thoughts there just about some of these areas I know people are talking about, but I don't think we've even got there yet?
Well, so most of these are academic concerns, right? So look, poisoning data sets, right? And we also have to be very clear. Are we talking about a private data set? Or are we talking about a large like a foundation model, right? Poisoning a foundation model, right? So like a Anthropic Claude or a OpenOrca from Mistral or something like that. That's an academic risk, and it's an academic risk that is not something that is doable at scale and at any precision level. On the other hand, private data sets, oh buddy, right? The example that I give there all the time is, for folks, and this is not Security Copilot, this is Copilot. I guess I should be very clear, not GitHub Copilot, the coding assistant either, but Microsoft Copilot, where it's helping internal users surface data. Their data poisoning attacks are trivial. Anybody who can write a document right, to one of your SharePoint sites is indexed by Copilot, right, can poison your data sets, right? And so, if I had a problem with the CEO, in fact, I've demonstrated this a couple of times for folks. If I had a problem with the CEO and I wanted to say lots of negative things about the CEO, I can script all that together and I can write some documents to SharePoint sites, and right. And then when somebody asks about the CEO, right, I have written more data than anybody else, right, through some, clever scripting or Control C and Control V, right, copying and pasting and repeating a bunch of data, and so I do have that, I do have that opportunity to poison data sets internally. But yeah, I mean, these are really interesting, questions. But I'm also going to say that, look, just being real, it's not the kind of stuff like these are very esoteric attacks. I guess the way that Don, what I would say to you here is, I've described these very much like, Meltdown in the wild. I don't know if you remember Meltdown. I'm yet to see an example of a threat actor exploiting Meltdown in the wild, partially because we don't have the telemetry. That's going to be the same thing here. You're not going to have the telemetry to discover this in most cases, at least at a large scale. Secondarily, there's easier ways to do it, and same thing here. Again, I think there's going to be easier ways to get compromised or to compromise data. But effectively, these really are just special cases of integrity attacks, which I'm going to be straight and say that we've done a really bad job of in security over the years. We're pretty good at availability. We're pretty good at confidentiality, and we really suck at integrity. And so, yeah.
Well, fantastic. Trey, any other key questions that you see roll in during the talk? Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
Always. Wouldn't be a live stream if I didn't talk on mute once, right? I had a couple of good comments and one question that came up I thought was interesting. Jake, based on your current experience with where AI, all these LLMs, where everything is right now, what you've seen, where you think it's going, which one do you think is the most reliable currently? And by reliable, I mean valid and true data output to this point. Okay, it's not lying to you as a model as consistently as the others.
No, I mean they're all different levels of bad. Maybe Mistral, maybe the Mistral. Gosh, I mean the mixture of experts model. I like MOE models. I think a little bit better, but there's so much like part of the problem is they're non-deterministic. So even when you test them, you're not, a pass isn't a pass, right? A pass is it passed this time, right? Not it'll pass next time, and the whole, So Mick Douglas is doing some work, with a AI retrieval augmented generation or RAG system called Concierge. And I've had a chance to play with that. I'm getting pretty good results there, as you would expect from a RAG system. But, and this is critical, right? The answers are only as good as your data, right? In that particular RAG system. And so if I'm asking the wrong data, if I'm asking the wrong questions relevant to the data that can be retrieved, then it still outputs garbage. And so it relies on a lot of pre-knowledge here. So I guess that yeah, I'm not trying to cop out. They're just all different levels of bad, and it's really hard to test. But doesn't that highlight the security problems, right? And means that we have jobs for the foreseeable future.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a great way to highlight that there's always going to be that kind of human element to this, and the security side, but also in the flaw side. If you give it bad data or the wrong data, you potentially inject your own risk or your own flaw. So you've always got to take that into account.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think the other thing, Jake, you mentioned earlier, AI most likely is not going to be taking a lot of jobs. And I think there's a lot of studies that actually showcase when you pair a human with good AI, you can actually get a lot better productivity and better results. And I think that's hopefully going to be what teams are looking for going forward, is leveraging it where it makes sense to process data and eliminate some of the tedious stuff, right? Because I mean, ultimately, there is a lot of tedious stuff in the world of cybersecurity. Dave mentioned it the first thing, and I think all of us that have been in this field for a long period of time see that you can weed through a lot of the tedious stuff and then focus on more of the strategic stuff that you may not have time getting to. Yeah,
and other presentations I've done through the Institute for Applied Network Security on AI, that's exactly the point that I keep bringing up is I don't want to replace, like to CISOs consistently, because they're always asking, well, how can I do more with less? And it's like, you're not getting rid of security staff, man. None of you are doing security. None of you are doing everything you should be doing in security now.
Yeah.
Right. And so what you're doing is you're moving the bar down, right? So where's the line, right? Where we're cutting off what we're doing versus what we're not. You're moving that. You're not removing analysts. Now that may mean different skilling. It may mean reskilling for security analysts, because I mean, all three of us on screen here, right? We've all been in security for, a long time in our careers, and we all have varied skill sets. And I know, Mark, you do things that I can't do. Trey, I know you do things I can't do, and I think that's true for each one of us, right? Relative to each other, right? And so as AI takes jobs, right? As AI takes jobs, as we turn and say, hey, we're going to turn chunks of this over to an AI system. There's still plenty, I hate to say it, like plenty of work left to do. And so,
yeah,
I think the big thing there too is a lot of it is mindset and people looking at the negative, like, oh, it's going to take my job. But no, it's only going to take your job if you refuse to be flexible yourself and learn something new and upskill yourself. It's going to only make you better. I look at it as a rubber ducky for myself personally. I use it to help with tedious things to bounce ideas off of.
Sure.
Always, it's a trust but verify thing. I don't ever take it at 100%, but it's a good quick start when I need it.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic. I mean, wise words from a wise man. How about that, right? So yeah. Well, hey guys, this has been fantastic. I appreciate you having me today, and I'll give everybody a couple of minutes for a bio break if that's cool with you. And yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Jake. Thank you.
Yeah, no, man, it's been fantastic. Hey, folks, thank you guys for having me. And we're on for a live stream this month, aren't we, Trey? Is that right?
We are at the end of the month on the 25th. So for those of you that don't know, you can find me, Tyler, my man behind the scenes here, and Jake doing a Threat Thursday live where we're going to show some pretty cool stuff off to you.
Very cool thing coming. Yes.
Yeah.
This month. So.
Oh yeah. Hey, anytime that when Trey's kind of like running down the stuff where he's like, yeah, you can build some malware, I'm like, yeah, let's do that, right? So it's really cool because I know a lot of part of the value, right, that SCYTHE brings is getting a chance to to do some of these attacks that require custom development. You don't have a custom development shop in house to go build out a payload, right? Like again, that's the value you're getting. So anyway. I'll shut up. I'm going to drop off here, guys. Thanks so much for your time and having me, and peace out.
Yeah, thank you, Jake.
Appreciate you, sir.